Welcome to NightLamp's reading of Mastery of Fate, written in the year 1907 by Christian Daa Larson. Part 1.
What man is and what man does determines in what conditions, circumstances, and environments he shall be placed. And since man can change both himself and his actions, he can determine what his fate is to be. To change himself, man must change his thought, because man is as he thinks. And to change his actions, he must change the purpose of his life, because every action is consciously or unconsciously inspired by the purpose held in view. To change his thought, man must be able to determine what impressions are to form in his mind, because every thought is created in the likeness of a mental impression. To choose his own mental impressions, man must learn to govern the objective senses, and must acquire the art of original thought. Everything that enters the mind through the physical senses will produce impressions upon the mind, unless prevented by original thought. These impressions will be direct reflections of the environment from whence they came. And since thoughts will be created in the exact likeness of these impressions, so long as man permits environment to impress the mind, his thoughts will be exactly like his environment. And since man becomes like the thoughts he thinks, he will also become like his environment. But man, in this way, not only grows into the likeness of his environment, but is, in addition, controlled by his environment, because his thoughts, desires, motives, and actions are suggested to him by the impressions that he willingly accepts from environment. Therefore, one of the first essentials in the mastery of fate is to learn to govern the physical senses so thoroughly that no impression can enter mind from without, unless it is consciously desired. This is accomplished by holding the mind in a strong, firm, positive attitude at all times, but especially while surrounded by conditions that are inferior. This attitude will bring the senses under the supremacy of the subconscious will, and will finally produce a state of mind that never responds to impressions from without, unless directed to do so. To overcome the tendency of the physical senses to accept, indiscriminately, all sorts of impressions from without, mind should, at frequent intervals, employ the physical senses in trying to detect the superior possibilities that may be latent in the various surrounding conditions, and gradually, the senses themselves will become selective, and will instantaneously inform the mind whenever an undesirable impression demands admission. While the senses are being employed in the search of superior possibilities, the impressions thus received should be analyzed and recombined in the constructive states of consciousness, and according to the mind's own original conception. This will promote original thinking, which will, in turn, counteract the tendency of the objective side of mind to receive suggestions from without. Every original thought that mind may create will, to a degree, change man and remake him according to what he inwardly desires to be, because every original thought is patterned after man's conception of himself when he is at his best. Thoughts inspired by environment are inferior or superior, according to what the environment may be, but an original thought is always superior, because it is inspired by man himself, while the superior elements of his being are predominant. When every thought that mind creates is an original thought, man will constantly grow in greatness, superiority, and worth. And when all these original thoughts are created with the same purpose in view, man will become exactly what is indicated by that purpose. Therefore, since man can base thinking upon any purpose that he may desire, he can, through original thinking, become whatever he may choose to become. Fate is the result of man's being and doing, a direct effect of the life and the works of the individual, a natural creation of man, and the creation is always the image and likeness of the Creator. Therefore, when man, through original thinking, acquires the power to become what he chooses to become, his fate will, of itself, change as man changes. And, through this law, he can create for himself any fate desired. That man will consciously and naturally create his own fate when he gains the power to recreate himself as he desires to be, is evident for various reasons. And the power to recreate himself is simply the power of original thought, because man becomes like the thoughts he thinks, and original thoughts are created in the likeness of man's ideal impressions of his superior self. That the fate of each individual person is the direct or indirect result of what that person is and does can be demonstrated by the following self-evident facts. The mental world in which a person lives is the exact reflection of what that person is, feels, and thinks. Therefore, when a superior life and worthier thoughts are attained, the mental world will also change accordingly. The circumstances and conditions of man's physical world are the direct or indirect effects of the active elements in his mental world, a fact we shall thoroughly demonstrate in the following pages. Like attracts like. Therefore, the associations of man are after his own kind, and as he changes for the better he will attract, and be attracted into better associations. The events that transpire in the life of man are the consequences of his own efforts to express himself in his individual world of action. Therefore, what happens to any person is the reaction of what that person has previously said or done. This being true, man has the power to cause any event to transpire that he may decide upon. Though to accomplish this, it is necessary to understand the law of action and reaction as applied both to the physical and metaphysical worlds. When man begins to recreate himself, he will rise superior to his present position. And since new and better opportunities always appear when man proves himself superior to his present position, he can, by changing himself as he desires, call forth any opportunity that he may desire. To have the privilege to take advantage of better opportunities is the direct path to better conditions, better circumstances, and better environments. And since man can create this privilege at will, he can create his own fate, his own future, his own destiny. However, the secret of creating this privilege at will lies in man's power to form only such impressions upon his mind as will originate constructive thought, because when all the thought he thinks is constructive, every mental process will be a building process, and will constantly increase the ability, the capacity, and the personal worth of man himself. This in turn makes man competent to accept the larger places that are waiting everywhere for minds with sufficient capability to fill them. Every thought has creative power, and this power will express itself according to the desire that was in mind when the thought was created. Therefore, if every thought is to express its creative power in the building up of man, mind must constantly be filled with the spirit of that purpose. When the desire for growth and superior attainment does not predominate in mind, the greater part of the creative energy of thought will misdirect, and artificial mental conditions will form, only to act as obstacles to man's welfare and advancement. The creative power of thought is the only power employed in the construction and reconstruction of man, and for this reason man is as he thinks. Consequently, when man thinks what he desires to think, he will become what he desires to become. But to think what he desires to think, he must consciously govern the process through which impressions are formed upon mind. To govern this process is to have the power to exclude any impression from without that is not desired, and to completely impress upon mind every original thought that may be formed, thus giving mind the power to think only what it consciously chooses to think. Before man can govern this process, he must understand the difference between the two leading attitudes of mind, the attitude of self-submission and the attitude of self-supremacy, and must learn how to completely eliminate the former, and how to establish all life, all thought, and all action absolutely upon the latter. When this is done, no impression can form upon mind without man's conscious permission, and complete control of the creative power of thought is permanently secured. To master the creative power of thought is to master the personal self, and to master the personal self is to master fate.
This concludes Mastery of Fate, Part 1.